I have a client. Let's call her Shirley. I want to tell you a little bit about Shirley. I assume no one's named Shirley in this room. If anyone is named Shirley, I'll change her name. Shirley's been trying to lose weight and fix her body for most of her life. A few years ago, she went plant-based, and for a little while, it felt like she'd finally cracked the code. The weight came off, her energy came back, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was in control. Like maybe she had finally solved the problem that's haunted her for decades, her body. Or more precisely, the belief that her body is a problem. But the weight crept back, gradually at first, then all at once, and then a little bit more. And along with it came shame, despair, and a deep, familiar sense of failure. She tried again and again, for a few weeks, for a month, sometimes longer, until life knocked her off course and she found herself back in the same cycle. She called me for a consult, and she said the sentence I hear more than almost any other sentence. I know what to do. Why can't I just make myself do it? At work, Shirley is extremely conscientious and chronically underappreciated. Her office is completely dysfunctional, and she's the one who's holding it all together. Despite all of her efforts, she feels like her boss holds her responsible for things that are not her fault, and he's upset with her a lot of the time. Every day, it seems, she asks herself some version of how can I do more? How can I be better? When I talk to her, she asks, how can I just not be bothered by all of it? In her family life, it's the same story. She finds herself doing all of the emotional labor, planning everything from holidays to home repairs, and she feels completely invisible. If her kids are still at home, she does everything for them. She packs the lunches, she tracks the schedules, she keeps the whole operation running, and no one even seems to notice. If her kids are grown, they don't call very much, and when they do, it feels obligatory, distant, strained. A slow, creeping numbness has crept into her life. She wonders what's wrong with her, why everything seems so much harder for her than it seems like it is for other people. How could she make herself easier to love? Maybe if she were more relaxed and she didn't complain about things as much. Maybe if she tried harder, things would change. It's been like this for a while, and now that Shirley's heading toward or well into middle age, she's starting to panic. She spent decades chasing wellness and self-improvement. She's chased them like a redemption arc. If she could just find the perfect system, the right diet, the right routine, finally, she'd be able to stay consistent. She'd feel good in her body, and she'd have permission to, she's not really sure what she needs permission to do or who's going to give it, but she's pretty sure it's going to come any day now from somewhere. It's the same loop playing out in every area of her life, year after year, decade after decade. How can I be better so it doesn't hurt so much? With food, with work, with family, it always comes back to self-blame. If she were more disciplined, she'd stick to her diet. If only she put in more hours and made more of an effort at work, her boss wouldn't be so frustrated. If only she were more patient, more fun, a better listener, a better mom, her family would want to spend more time with her and connect more fully with her. If I could just be better. It's been her mantra for as long as she can remember, echoing across every part of her life. The fantasy of being better is exhausting and demoralizing, but it's worth it for the illusion of control. Because if it's all her fault, then maybe she can fix it. Maybe there's still a version of herself that she could become who finally gets it right. A version who eats clean, who isn't bothered by anything, and who never needs too much from anyone. But the fantasy is starting to break down. Deep in her soul, some part of Shirley is beginning to get very tired of this game. Some part of her wants to grow up, to escape the role of a passive child who just wants to be safe and good. And that same part of her is starting to feel angry. Really, really, really angry. And the more she tries to plaster a pleasant, no problem smile over her existential rage, the angrier she gets. She's probably too conscientious to really let it rip, but maybe she has dreams about stabbing people with kitchen knives. Maybe she does a little primal screaming in her car during her commute. Maybe she rage vacuums. I don't know if any of that sounds familiar to anyone. Shirley is in an abusive relationship with her own obsession with self-improvement. She's addicted to it. And like most addictions, it's quietly ruining her life. It doesn't look that way to anyone else. It looks disciplined, responsible, admirable. But it's all an effort to dodge the toxic shame at the center of her psyche that she will do anything to avoid. Every new goal, every new habit, every new protocol, every new program, it's all just an attempt to outrun the shame. Shirley is terrified of feeling ordinary. Ordinary is unsafe. She learned very early on in life that to be safe, to feel worthy, she had to be impressive. She has to earn love and approval. And she's lived her entire life in a culture that prizes exceptionalism and punishes vulnerability. So now, even just being average feels like failure. And feeling flawed, well, that feels dangerous. But the more she tries to fix herself, the more broken she feels, because no amount of self-improvement can touch that core of toxic shame, the belief that she is fundamentally unacceptable, that there's something deeply wrong with her. That belief was planted long ago by family, by culture, by systems that rely on her self-doubt and self-erasure to keep her quiet, to keep her in line, and to sell her the cure. So many of us are just like Shirley. We're addicted to the idea of fixing ourselves because it's the only way we can manage the completely overwhelming tidal wave of shame that we would otherwise feel about the fact, the reality, that we are flawed, that we're not perfect. We keep getting high year after year on the promise of, I'll be a different person in 6 months, in order to avoid sitting with the deep terror that maybe there's something fundamentally unacceptable and unlovable about who we really are. The addiction to perfection becomes a kind of armor against the world's most terrifying and unspoken question. If I stopped chasing a better version of myself, how could anyone still love me? How can I still be worth anything? Brené Brown defines narcissism as the shame-based fear of being ordinary. And we have an easier time recognizing narcissism when it presents in its grandiose form. The person who constantly seeks admiration, who dominates conversations, who needs to be seen as the smartest or the most special person in the room. But narcissism also has a quieter form, and it often hides in perfectionism, people-pleasing, and chronic self-doubt. It whispers that being average is unacceptable, that your worth depends on being exceptional, and anything less than that is a failure. And both of these forms of narcissism are rooted in the same wounding and the same terror. If I'm not extraordinary, I'm worthless. It can be a little disorienting, it was for me, to recognize that the sense of inferiority that so many of us live with is in fact a narcissistic wound of shame and abandonment. It's a distorted and preoccupied self-focus that quietly insists that we're uniquely broken, we're fundamentally lacking, or we're somehow just worse instead of better than everyone else. We're the worst ever. When you believe your flaws are uniquely awful, or that your failures are more significant than anyone else's, you're still centering yourself in a very distorted way. And that keeps you in a false version of yourself, just like the grandiose narcissist is trapped in their false persona that they've created to keep themselves feeling safe. This keeps us from accessing the vulnerability that actually allows us to meaningfully connect with other people. And that is why it exists, because at some point along the way, connection with other people from a place of vulnerability was extremely unsafe for us. We all have armor of one type or another. Some of us built up our armor out of arrogant bluster and swashbuckling swagger, using a mask of false confidence as a shield to keep others at bay. But others among us developed a quieter kind of armor. And that's primarily who I'm talking to today. That's Shirley. It's most of my clients. It's me. It's anyone who's surrounded themselves with the armor of self-effacement, of perfectionism, of relentless self-criticism, of a profound fear of taking up space. Like grandiosity, this is an attempt to avoid the raw exposure of vulnerability. And like grandiosity, it's also an attempt to manage and manipulate how others perceive us, so we never have to feel the terrible pain of rejection and abandonment ever again. But when you live from a place of constant fear like that, you're disconnected, not just from other people, but most of all from yourself. In order to protect ourselves as children, we made ourselves the problem. And as children, we had no choice. We could not tolerate seeing our parents as incapable or unresponsive or unsafe. But now, many decades later, we do have a choice. We don't have to approach our life like a dependent, helpless child, accepting whatever scraps we can scrounge up and apologizing for troubling the world with our very existence. But man, part of us is hooked on those scraps. The inferior, apologetic persona is what we constructed long ago in order to survive, and we are not going to give it up very easily. It's a false self, and it's a prison, but it's a comfy prison. It feels familiar. It feels far safer in there, clinging to an identity that is built around inadequacy, than to actually risk stepping into the world and into the unknown terrain of our full humanity. The original Snow White story, not the Disney-fied version, but the original, more disturbing one, as the Grimm brothers like to play things, captures the allure of living in an inferior false self through the metaphor of Snow White's glass coffin. After she eats the poisoned apple, which represents taking in the lie that her life force and her beauty and her emerging womanhood are dangerous, Snow White falls into a death-like sleep. The dwarves place her inside of a glass coffin where she's visible and preserved forever, but she's untouchable. She remains there on permanent display so others can benefit from her withdrawal from the world. She's perfect. She's passive. She's inert. She does not decay, but she also does not live. She's an idealized image of unchallenging femininity and compliance, frozen in time, waiting for her prince to come, for someone to grant her awakening. Snow White is not actually awakened in the original story by her handsome prince's kiss. She's jostled. She's accidentally bumped into by attendants who are carrying her away. She's being stolen, actually, by the prince from the dwarves. He wants to keep her for himself as an ornament in his home. And as they jostle her, it causes the piece of poisoned apple to dislodge from her throat. Her return to life is not a romantic rescue, but a rude awakening. And that is how it is. The journey out of the glass coffin does not come through someone else finally seeing our worth at long last. That is a false promise that will never come true, no matter how much we chase it. It comes only through disruption, a crisis, a loss, a moment of deep discomfort that shakes something loose in us, something that has the power to break the spell of perfection and force us finally to wake up, to grow up. The addiction to self-improvement, to the promise of someday I'll be perfect enough to be worthy, it keeps us trapped in a kind of eternal adolescence. We are perpetual children who are terrified of growing up. There's a little girl part of us that wants to remain that way. And that makes us such good consumers. As long as we are afraid and tentative and unsure and waiting to be given permission or told what to do, we are so easy to sell to. We trade our intuition away for instructions. And the more patriarchal, definitive, and invested in our obedience the solution is, the more we're soothed by it. The consumer world becomes our all-knowing parent, the prince who is here to rescue us. It speaks with a very reassuring authority. Here's what you need. Here's who you should be. Follow these steps and you will be redeemed. The shame that we carry from childhood is the perfect match for an economy and culture that rewards self-erasure and call it self-optimization. We mistake anxiety and exhaustion for productivity hacking. And we forget that the ache that we feel is not personal failure. It's the cost of living in a system that demands we be machines instead of humans. The privatization of stress has been one of the most successful and complete ideological projects of what's known as neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is, at its root, an economic and political worldview that treats the market as the primary organizer of life. It reduces human value to productivity and, most importantly, personal responsibility. Under its logic, every problem becomes a signal that you, individually, just need to get it together and do better. Regulate harder. Optimize more. Get back in control. The widespread insecurity and risk that is just baked into everyday life, economic, relational, ecological, it gets reframed as a mindset issue. Can't pay your bills? You better learn to manifest abundance. You burned out from caregiving and gig work and emotional labor? You need to block out your time better. Maybe try some breath work. Depression and anxiety, which are natural responses to impossible circumstances that we find ourselves in, are repackaged as a negative mindset or even just your genetic wiring. This is just how you are. And these things are best addressed through productivity, wellness routines, positivity. Under neoliberalism, there's no room for collective grief, for rage, resistance, only individual attitude adjustments and psych meds. You become your own project, your own brand, your own lifelong fixer-upper. Neoliberalism whispers the exact same lie that the wounded inner child already believes. If you're suffering, it means there's something wrong with you, and it's your fault, and it's your job to fix it. And so we double down. We internalize the language of the market. We treat our nervous systems like productivity tools. Our healing becomes a side hustle. We regulate, we restrict, we rebrand ourselves. And if we grew up learning that love was earned and not given, and that our worth depends on being good and helpful and impressive, then we already carry the blueprint for this kind of self-surveillance. The system doesn't even have to oppress us directly. It just has to keep us believing what we already believe, that the problem is us. And so we hustle, we perfect, we perform, and all the while, the little girl inside remains stuck in a fantasy. If I just follow the rules well enough, someone will finally come and tell me I'm okay. In this world, every wound is a branding opportunity. Every insecurity, a potential new market. We're taught to see our exhaustion and overwhelm, and even our isolation, all as evidence that we just haven't optimized hard enough. Our misery is profitable. If we have an infinite need to fix ourselves, then hey, there's an infinite supply of diets, programs, workshops, pills, and other solutions that all promise very persuasively to fix us. The $50 billion self-help industry, combined with the $200 billion diet industry and the $700 billion beauty industry, are all here to help. The moment you stop believing that you're broken, you stop buying, and industry can't have that. A culture that rewards overwork, hyper-individualism, and constant self-optimization doesn't feel all that oppressive when you've already learned to see your worth as conditional. It feels familiar. It makes sense. It tells us a story that we already believe, that our pain is our fault, that our value must be earned, and that rest, pleasure, and interdependence are indulgent or dangerous. Neoliberalism didn't invent self-abandonment, but it did give it a moral frame, gave it a productivity metric, a brand identity, and it turned our survival into surveillance. So with all of that, is it any wonder that we seek escape from such an oppressive world? We reach for self-soothing in ways that may offer temporary relief, but ultimately harm us. Alcohol, shopping, food, doom scrolling. These are not signs of weakness. They are the body and the psyche doing their very best to find an impossible balance in an impossible situation. But when these coping strategies backfire, as they inevitably always do, we don't question the conditions that drove us to them. We blame ourselves. We turn that blame back inward. I am out of control. I have no willpower. I need to fix myself. The system happily reinforces this story at every turn. It applauds our shame, and it offers up new solutions to manage it. Another diet, another app, another plan for becoming the person that we really should be, somebody who doesn't need to soothe ourselves to survive in this world. And the cycle continues. Pain, coping, failure, shame, more blame. Marshall Rosenberg, the creator of nonviolent communication, or NVC, calls the judgmental tone of our inner voice the language of domination. It's an internalized script of criticism, blame, and control that perfectly echoes the systems that we were raised in, both the family system and the economic system. It doesn't ask what we need because it doesn't care what we need. It demands that we do better. But why would we think if we can't extend basic kindness and compassion to ourselves and to ask ourselves what we need, that we could possibly hope to extend it to other people? Our inner dialogue of blame and control inevitably bleeds into how we see the world and into our relationships. We judge others the same way we judge ourselves. We can't help it. When we've been swimming in self-improvement for so long, we don't even realize how cruel and punishing our self-talk can be. Our relentlessly harsh and controlling inner critic sounds responsible. Sounds like a disciplined adult, the disciplined adult that we need. The voice of maturity. Speaking to ourselves in any other way, one that's, heaven forbid, with kindness and compassion, can often feel dangerous and reckless, lazy, as if we're making excuses, or the greatest sin of all, that we've abandoned our potential to be better. The first step to healing any addiction is always noticing. We have to develop the ability to get out of habit and even just observe what we're doing, and to begin to see and to feel the difference between how we habitually talk to ourselves and how we might want to do it differently. One thing that I have found incredibly helpful in this type of work is to realize the I that is feeling inadequate or ashamed is not an I. It is part of me that is feeling that way. And in fact, there are lots of parts of me, and they all have very different opinions about what is happening and what needs to be done about it. They do not and they will never all agree with each other, and that means that not any one of them is the boss. There isn't one particular voice in the cacophony of voices in my head that is right and that I need to listen to. There are some that are louder than others. There are some that are more aggressive than others. But once we begin to notice that there are many and that they are not operating in lockstep, we can begin to soften the grip that their demands have on us. Some of you may have heard of internal family systems or IFS therapy, or maybe you've heard of the concept of someone having a complex, like an inferiority complex or a mother complex. These are just different ways of describing the same idea, that we have different parts of the self, and that they're all sort of struggling to control the wheel. The Pixar movie Inside Out is a fantastic portrayal of the conflicts among our different parts and the chaos that can ensue when we try to silence them or we put one in charge at the expense of the others. Each of these voices, these parts, these complexes, they are trying to help. They developed for a reason. They arose in response to real pain, to real fear, real abandonment, and that includes the fixer. That includes our self-improvement junkie. She's trying to protect you in the best way that she knows how. So she's not to be ignored or rejected or hated or suppressed or placated with the latest diet or optimization protocol. She needs to be listened to. We have to slow down and ask. We have to get curious. Who is talking right now? Who is trying to fix me? Who's terrified that I'll fail or be humiliated or be ordinary, even worse? And rather than exiling or overpowering that part, we turn to it with curiosity and gentleness. We ask what it's so afraid of. What is it trying to protect? And most of all, what does it need? If you're anything like me or Shirley, it's very likely that some of your parts, or a lot of your parts, are trying to protect you from an enormous, seemingly unbearable mountain of shame. At a fundamental and mostly unconscious level, you believe there's something rotten at the core about you, and you're terrified to face it. And that's so understandable, because coming face to face with that belief feels like it would be unbearable. It would mean coming into contact with everything that it has buried along the way. Enormous grief for the love that you did not get as a child, for the ways that you've had to contort yourself to survive in this world, for the years and decades that you have lost trying to be someone else. And that gives way to anger, volcanic, incandescent rage at those who've hurt you, dismissed you, taught you to hate parts of yourself. But that grief and anger does not just disappear because we ignore it. We have a lot of great literature to remind us of this concept, including the picture of Dorian Gray, The Telltale Heart, Banquo's Ghost, and Macbeth. There are many examples where you sweep it under the rug and it comes back in some horrible way. What we do not face festers. It leaks out of us as resentment at our partner, our kids, our coworkers, and most of all, ourselves. It simmers beneath the surface as agitation, impatience, and a nagging sense that you're living someone else's life. What we try to bury never goes away. It just waits. And just like toxic waste buried in the soil around it, it poisons our life, and it poisons our perceptions of the world around us and our relationships. So if the reason that we're addicted to fixing ourselves is because the alternative, which is just sitting with our imperfection, feels intolerable, then we only have one job. Our job, our only job, is to expand our capacity to be with ourselves, to sit quietly and honestly with the truth of our imperfection, to build our tolerance for staying present without fleeing into the fantasy of who we'll be and how we'll feel when we finally get it right, and to resist the urge to soothe ourselves with a nice polished narrative of growth and progress. This is a big trap a lot of us get into. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting better every day. And most of all, our job is to refuse to participate in ritualized self-punishment in order to preempt judgment and rejection from other people. And that might be the hardest crutch of all to give up. It's the most seductive escape that we have. It promises a distorted but very potent relief. It's better to be broken than to be ordinary. There is great comfort in being, as 12-Step likes to put it, the biggest piece of crap that the world has ever revolved around. Because, hey, at least the world revolves around you. Like, that's something. That means that you have some value in the market. In our neoliberal world, even our pain must be productive. Our shame is just another commodity to leverage for status. So developing more tolerance for ourselves in that state of shame and imperfection, I am afraid to tell you, is not a neat and tidy process. It doesn't solve the problem or escape the trap in a way that appeals to our progress and accomplishment-obsessed ego. It just means sitting in a really confusing and contradictory messiness a lot of the time, and probably not necessarily feeling that awesome about it. but stewing in it anyway. It means probably not knowing who we even are for a while. Because when we're feeling things that we haven't allowed ourselves to feel for decades or maybe ever, our identity is going to get a little shaky. We're going to be in a state of serious flux. The Jungians call this holding the tension of the opposites, and it sucks. But it is effective. It's recognizing that the dilemma at hand has no solution. There is no solution. By definition, it is impossible. There's no way out. We've spent our lives trying to fix ourselves, but ultimately we have to come to the recognition that we cannot be fixed. We have no choice but to surrender the search for a solution at the level of the ego and allow ourselves to feel the shame that we've defended ourselves against our entire life. This is very analogous to the third step in 12 step, if any of you are familiar with that, which is turning over our will to the higher power as we understand it. By getting our ego out of the way and allowing ourselves to just feel agitated, feel hopeless, feel distressed. That is how we finally notice that we have a poison apple in our throat. And we have a chance to spit out the poisoned apple and breathe ourselves awake. And in my experience, this feels simultaneously very destabilizing and exhilarating. It's awful in the sense that you have no idea who the hell you are or what is happening or what's going on. But it's also exhilarating in the sense that as you reclaim these parts of yourself that have been long exiled for your entire adult life, you will immediately recognize them as belonging to you. And your sense of self will expand, even as everything else gets very uncertain and challenging and difficult. So whatever may be coming your way, there will be more of you there to meet it than there was before. One of my favorite Carl Jung quotes is that all the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved. They can only be outgrown. We add capacities and experiences that eventually make us bigger than the problems. As we become willing to feel more, to reclaim parts of us that didn't always hang out with us, then we don't have to apologize for our existence quite as much. And we don't have to promise to be someone other than who we are. The addiction to perfection starts to ebb away, not in a "I'm cured" kind of way, which would be very pleasing to the ego, but in a quiet, steady reclamation of our full, messy, too much and never enough life. The real alchemy of healing begins with feeling exactly the thing that we most want to escape. As Tara Brach says, the most important thing in your life, the most important thing in your life is what you are unwilling to feel, because you will build your life around avoiding that feeling. The real law of attraction is avoidance. What we resist persists. Our attempts at escape guarantee that the next encounter will be with exactly that thing we most fear and dread. There is no better way to keep ourselves in an addictive relationship with perfection or food or alcohol or control or productivity than by attempting to avoid all of the grief, all of the rage, all of the longing that are just below our coping strategies. What I've learned from Shirley is that midlife is when what used to protect us now starts to suffocate us. The armor starts to grow very heavy. It used to feel like resilient independence, and now it feels like an ache of lonely disconnection. The glass walls of the coffin are starting to press in. We're safe, but the safety is stifling. It's airless and stale in there. We wanted to protect our peace, but all we've really done is preserved a persona that isn't even us. And now, in midlife, the soul wants out. It wants aliveness more than it wants security. As Brené Brown puts it, at some point in midlife, the universe whispers in your ear, "I am not effing around. You're halfway to dead." You are not a problem to be solved. You are a life, an entire life, a whole self, an unknown and uncharted territory that wants desperately to be lived. Midlife is not a crisis because anything has gone wrong. It's a crisis because there's something trying to be born, and your addictions are trying to stop it from coming into the world. So you're in a war between the defenses that have kept you safe your whole life and the call of your soul, which can no longer tolerate being poisoned into silence and compliance. And for some of us, that call's a little louder than it is for others. For me, it was loud enough to pretty much detonate anything in my life that wasn't real. But I was a tough case. My life had become a shrine to codependence, to people-pleasing, to self-abandonment. I needed something a little stronger than a little gentle encouragement. I needed the walls to come tumbling down. That's what it took, in my case, to stop betraying myself in the name of keeping everyone around me comfortable. And I should have known it wouldn't be easy. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm a gold star, codependent doormat who, until a couple of years ago, I wasn't even really aware that I had emotions. I'm the last stop in a long lineage of women who turned themselves into walking ghosts in order to survive. They swallowed their grief and their fury, they buried their needs, and they shaped their lives around the comfort of other people in their lives. Both of my parents died relatively young, and both of them literally lost their voices in the last years of their life. I'm enough of a mystical weirdo that I don't think that's a coincidence. They had so much terror of facing the shame that was at the core of their self-identity that even their body forced them into silence and an inability to reckon with that. But somehow for me, my psyche just said, no, not me, not today. It was less of a decision and more of a rupture. Something primal and just done. Spit out the poison. I have some sort of irrepressible ungovernability that just said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Other people might get away with a little less collateral damage. I wish that for you. Maybe you just need to start telling the truth in your relationships a little bit more. Or maybe you just need to stop managing everyone else's emotions like it's your full-time job. You may not need to entirely blow up your life, but I guarantee you need some kind of reckoning. None of this was ever about your diet or your job or your morning routine. None of it is about how you can be better. That is not the central question of your life. The central question is, can I bear to be with myself as I really am? And if you're like me and Shirley, at first you will find that no, you cannot bear it. Not really. But one tiny bit at a time, one day at a time, one truthful sentence at a time, one no at a time, your capacity will begin to get bigger. And the nature of who you really are beneath all of that endless striving will begin to be revealed. Your life is not a project to be fixed, a system to be optimized, a brand to be curated. That is the fiction that has imprisoned you while serving everyone else very nicely throughout your life. It served your parents and caregivers who could not bear to see their own imperfection reflected back through you. And it certainly serves our social and economic systems, which thrive on your insecurity and make endless promises to fill the same insatiable void that they helped to create and sustain. We all have a choice. We can let the poison keep us asleep and pretty, or we can wake up and break the glass. If you want to be free, at some point you have to stop asking for permission. You have to stop trying to prove that you're worth letting out. Nothing and no one is ever going to do this for you. But fortunately, as the 18th century Jewish mystic Baal Shem Tov reminds us, let me fall if I must fall. The one I will become will catch me.